The Civil Rights Act turns 50 this year. The landmark legislation outlawed segregation on the job, in the classroom, and in public places like parks, hotels, and restaurants. WGBH News reporter Clennon King recently sat down with two Boston area residents who fought for civil rights on the front lines in Georgia, Florida, and Virginia.
I can't imagine where we'd be today were it not for what we stood up for and did then.
Mimi Jones of Roxbury remembers the summer of '64 in St. Augustine, Florida, a hotbed of racial injustice, where the Klan and the police were one and the same, where attacks at segregated beaches were commonplace, and people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were squarely in the crosshairs of Jim Crow, a place also where Mimi and others marched at night.
I just recall being in the sort of narrow streets of St. Augustine and having Klansmen, even children, attack us with rebel flags as we marched.
But nothing was more vivid to her than what happened when she and 5 others jumped into a segregated motel swimming pool.
I had difficulty breathing, and I turned, and it was somebody pouring this substance that turned out to be muriatic acid in the pool on us.
A fully clothed police officer then jumped in to arrest them. The incident became national news, prompting outrage from President Lyndon Johnson.
Our whole foreign policy and everything else go to hell over this. Yesterday in the swimming pool in St. Augustine, they jumped in and police jumped in.
But Mimi Ford Jones of Roxbury is not the only civil rights veteran who settled in the metropolitan area of Boston. There were literally hundreds, including one who lives in this Brookline neighborhood. For Skip Griffin, the fight for civil rights was part of his father's work.
He would always say, if you haven't found something you're willing to die for, you ain't fit to live, you know. I mean, that's basically was his philosophy.
His father played a pivotal role in a student walkout in Prince Edward County, Virginia, when an all-white school board refused to build a new high school for 400 black students, even though the old one only accommodated less than half that number.
When my father took a stand with the students in 1951, it cost him everything.
Cost not only his father, but also his mother, who suffered several nervous breakdowns.
It's not something that she chose, but it's not something that she would have walked away from either.
Nor did Mimi Jones, who hopes this generation will stand up for what's right.
What I say to them is that understand that one person can make a difference. You matter. You can make a difference.
And to think that they were only 15 or 16 at the time. Now, on tomorrow, we'll talk to a woman who, at the age of 12, basically was actually witnessed the Birmingham bombing at the age of 12. And so tomorrow we'll talk to her. And she lost both her sister, Emily, as well as her sight.
I have to say, Clennon, those visuals are chilling. I mean, I was a teenager at the time, young, but I don't remember that. Where did you get all that?
Well, believe it or not, I've been working on a film, a documentary film, for the last 14 years. Oh. And so the civil rights movement is an important thing to me because my family was involved in it. So I've been collecting that material for a long time.
Look forward to the longer piece. Thank you, Clennon, for that. All right, well, as the fight for civil rights raged in the South, a group of prominent women from Boston traveled to St. Augustine to participate in sit-ins at segregated restaurants. Among them, Mary Parkman Peabody, the 72-year-old mother of then Massachusetts Governor Endicott Peabody, whose arrest was front-page news from coast to coast. I'm joined now by the daughters of the late Esther Burgess and the late Florence Rowe, who accompanied Mrs. Peabody to St. Augustine, Julia Burgess and Bobby Rowe de Marneff. Thank you both for joining us. So,
Thank you.
Julia,
Thank you.
What do you remember from that time when your mother traveled down there with Mrs. Peabody?
Well, at the time, I was only 17, and the whole country, as pointed out in the video, the whole country was in turmoil. And in my house, in my home, it was 24-hour nonstop news. My mother herself was a very brilliant woman, and if she lived today, she'd have probably been had a very successful career. But she always stood up for what she thought was right. She had two passions, racial injustice and religion. And so when she was asked by representatives of Dr. Martin Luther King to participate in the movement in St. Augustine, she leapt at the chance. And
what happened to her? Was she jailed?
Yes, she and Mary Peabody, Hester Campbell, and
Bobby's mom,
Bobby's mother, Frances Rowe, all went to a restaurant that was in St. Augustine, and they were put out. My mother was, because of the segregation, they were put out of the restaurant, and my mother was arrested and sent to jail, which, if you had known my mother, I mean, she would, just being in jail, she was, yes, there she is. On one hand, she was probably terrified, but on the other hand, it was probably one of the most proud moments of her life. So at that time, the other women were not put in jail because my mother was African American, which is why she was jailed. But the following day, it was pointed out to Mrs. Peabody and Mrs. Rowe and Mrs. Campbell that for it to make the national news and to really push forward the Civil Rights Bill, that it would be good if they went to jail too.
And Mary Peabody did.
Yes.
So your dad was a big monkey muck at John Hancock. Was this a difficult position for him when your mom joins the Civil Rights Act?
No, not at all. I mean, he was afraid when she asked that she would like to go with her friends. He thought, well, and he was right. He said, I think that it's slightly dangerous, and when you get there, they may ask you to do something more than just going on the march. And he was right. They did.
What did they ask her to do?
Well, they asked those ladies to go into the restaurant and break the rules. Anyway, they did go, and but then she asked whether she called home when the idea was that they would be maybe arrested and then sent to jail. And my father said she could not go to jail, and she could not be arrested and go to jail.
So she came back.
So she came back. She had to spend the night in a safe house, and then was flown back to Boston the next day.
Do you, Julia, and then Bobby, feel like your moms made a significant difference? About here we are 50 years later. Did they make a significant difference at the time?
Oh, yes, because that incident in St. Augustine, once it got the national press, at the time the Civil Rights Bill was being filibustered in the Senate, and it was that incident, then continued demonstrations that happened over the next month that pushed forward the passing of the Civil Rights Bill. Also, just in my own personal life, the environment in which I grew up, my father was the first African-American Episcopal bishop, first African-American bishop of any mainline Protestant church. And we were under a very tight, because we had to maintain an image, we were under very tight restrictions. And so I was looking forward to going to college at the time. And what it did was influence me to be very much involved in social issues after that, and involve my children. And my children today are very progressive, and also, so she was a wonderful influence.
Why was your mom so progressive back then? What was it? What was instilled in her?
Well, actually, the Peabody family and Mrs. Peabody and my brother-in-law Mike Peabody were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. And Mike Peabody, my brother-in-law, who married my sister, was talking to Jim Breeden, and they thought of this idea of having some ladies from the North go down to the march and support what the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was asking for, more people to come down. And that's what happened. And these four ladies were great friends anyway. They worked together in the helping the families of the men in the what it was called, the Episcopal Divinity School, who were training to be ministers, and their families had children, and so Mrs. Peabody and my mother and Mrs. Campbell and Mrs. Burgess all worked for those wives.
It's just a wonderful story, and I feel privileged to know about it now, and stupid that I didn't know before now.
No,
Bobby DeMarneff and Julia Burgess, thanks so much.